How Mossad smuggled a scientist out of Tehran in a dismantled washing machine. The screwdriver slipped. Dr. Reza Ahmadi froze. His hand hovered above the fourth panel of the industrial washing machine, the one that concealed the modified cavity where his body would fold into an impossible contortion for the next 11 hours. Outside the safe-house basement, footsteps echoed in the alley. The Basij patrol passed this location every 43 minutes. It had been 41. The Mossad operative across from him, a woman who had introduced herself only as Tamar, held up 2 fingers. 2 minutes. Ahmadi's breathing quickened. The cavity measured 68 centimeters in length, 42 in width. Ahmadi stood 173 centimeters tall. The mathematics seemed incompatible with human anatomy. Tamar had explained the procedure 3 times. Fetal position, head tucked, arms wrapped, knees compressed against chest. A pharmaceutical cocktail would slow his heart rate and lower his core temperature. The machine's exterior would be marked with shipping manifests bound for Ankara. The truck would cross 2 borders, 11 hours minimum, possibly 14 if the Tabriz checkpoint ran long. The footsteps grew louder. Tamar moved to the window, her hand resting on something beneath her jacket. The patrol continued past. She returned to the machine and picked up the screwdriver Ahmadi had dropped. She completed the panel removal in 8 seconds. The cavity was ready. Ahmadi looked at his watch. It was 10:47 p.m. on November 3rd, 2009. In 13 minutes, he would either begin his escape from Iran or he would be dead. 6 months earlier, in a windowless room beneath the Kiryat military complex in Tel Aviv, 3 photographs were arranged on a steel table. The first showed a man in his late 40s standing beside a centrifuge array. The second captured the same man entering a nondescript building in the Lavizan district of Tehran. The third was a thermal satellite image showing heat signatures consistent with uranium enrichment processes beneath that same building. The man in the photographs was Dr. Reza Ahmadi, one of 12 senior metallurgists working within Iran's nuclear program. Ahmadi possessed something the other 11 did not: a sister in Montreal, a daughter studying medicine in Germany, and a gambling debt to Revolutionary Guard officers that totaled $37,000. The debt made him desperate. The family abroad made him vulnerable. The knowledge in his head made him invaluable. Eli Rosen, the Mossad case officer presenting the photographs, had spent 9 months building this profile. Rosen was 51 years old, a veteran of operations in Damascus, Beirut, and Baghdad. His specialty was recruitment in place of technical personnel. His success rate was 73%. His failures were all dead. Across the table sat David Katz, Deputy Director of Operations, a man who had authorized 17 extractions in the past decade. 14 had succeeded. The 3 failures had resulted in international incidents, burned networks, and executed assets. Katz did not approve operations on potential alone. He required certainty. Rosen provided it. Ahmadi had made contact. An email sent to the Canadian Embassy, routed through 7 proxy servers, offering information in exchange for debt forgiveness and a passport to anywhere outside the Middle East. The email contained technical specifications for a centrifuge design that had not yet appeared in any Western intelligence report. The specifications were genuine. Ahmadi was real. The operation was authorized. Dr. Reza Ahmadi was born in 1962 in Mossad, the son of a carpet merchant. He studied at Tehran Polytechnic, graduated top of his class in 1984, and spent the next decade working in civilian industrial applications before being recruited into the nuclear program in 1995. His area of expertise was corrosion-resistant alloys used in high-temperature centrifuge construction. By 2009, he had co-authored 9 classified papers on miraging steel applications and had direct knowledge of Iran's P2 centrifuge capabilities. This information alone would have been valuable. What made Ahmadi critical was his access to the Fordo facility near Qom, a uranium enrichment site buried deep inside a mountain and unknown to Western intelligence until September 2009. Ahmadi had been inside Fordo 17 times. He knew the layout, the security protocols, the number of centrifuges, and the timeline for operational capacity. He could identify every senior scientist working on the project. He had seen the procurement routes for specialized components. He could describe the facility's vulnerabilities. Extracting him from Iran would provide Israel and its allies with a complete map of Iran's most secretive nuclear site. Leaving him in place risked his arrest, torture, and execution, which would also reveal that his communications had been compromised. The operation had to move quickly. Tamar was not her real name. Her real name was Yael Shahar, 34 years old, born in Haifa, recruited into Mossad at 23 after completing mandatory military service in the intelligence corps. She spoke Farsi with a Tehrani accent, Arabic with a Damascus inflection, and English with a slight British overlay from 2 years spent at the London School of Economics under a Canadian passport. Her operational specialty was urban infiltration in hostile territories. She had run networks in Syria, coordinated dead drops in Beirut, and successfully extracted a Hamas financier from Gaza City using a modified ambulance. The Tehran operation would be her most complex. She would enter Iran through the Kurdish border crossing near Sardasht, using a Swedish passport identifying her as a textile buyer for a European import firm. The passport was genuine, created through a shell company Mossad maintained in Stockholm. The company had a functional website, tax records, and a phone line answered by a Swedish-speaking operative in Haifa. Shahar's cover would hold under standard scrutiny. Deep scrutiny would expose her in 48 hours. The operation timeline allowed for 60 hours from entry to extraction. Margin for error was minimal. The second operative assigned to the mission was known in the field as Daniel. His actual name was classified even within the operational planning documents. He was 42 years old and had spent 18 of those years working in covert logistics. His role was infrastructure, establishing safe houses, acquiring vehicles, creating supply chains, and building escape routes. For the Tehran operation, Daniel had entered Iran 3 weeks before Shahar, using a forged Turkish passport and traveling as a construction equipment dealer. He had bribed 2 customs officials at the Bazargan border crossing, paid for expedited visa processing, and established himself in a rented apartment in the Sadagieh district of western Tehran. From this base, he acquired 3 vehicles: a commercial delivery truck, a sedan with diplomatic plates stolen from the Armenian embassy parking garage, and a motorcycle with removed registration tags. He rented 2 additional apartments under false identities, both selected for rear exit access and proximity to major highways. He purchased 17 burner phones, 4 laptop computers, encrypted communication devices disguised as car radios, and a portable document scanner capable of processing classified materials. He also recruited a driver, a disaffected former taxi operator with debts to a local crime syndicate and no love for the Revolutionary Guard. The driver would be told he was smuggling opium to Turkey. He would not learn the true cargo until the border crossing was complete. This operational security measure was non-negotiable. The plan to extract Ahmadi required 4 stages: contact, evaluation, preparation, and exfiltration. Contact was established through a dead drop in Laleh Park, a public space in North Tehran where Ahmadi jogged 3 mornings per week. Shahar, posing as a Swedish buyer touring Tehran's carpet markets, sat on a bench along Ahmadi's running route and left a folded newspaper with a note tucked inside the sports section. The note contained a phone number and instructions to call from a public phone at a specific time. Ahmadi called. The conversation lasted 90 seconds. He confirmed his identity by answering 3 questions about his technical work that only he could answer. He agreed to a face-to-face meeting. The meeting occurred 2 days later in the Tajrish Bazaar, a crowded marketplace where surveillance was difficult. Shahar arrived wearing a headscarf and sunglasses, carrying shopping bags that matched her cover. Ahmadi appeared nervous, checking over his shoulder 4 times in the first minute. Shahar gave him a small package disguised as a spice container. Inside was a smartphone with encrypted messaging software, a written list of the information he needed to provide, and a sedative he would need to take before the extraction. The list was extensive. Facility layouts, personnel rosters, centrifuge specifications, procurement networks, and security protocols. Ahmadi had 2 weeks to gather the information. Shahar told him the extraction would occur on November 3rd. She did not tell him how. Operational security required compartmentalization. Ahmadi would know the method only when it was too late for him to compromise it. The concept of using a washing machine as a smuggling vessel originated not with Mossad, but with Kurdish trafficking networks that had been moving contraband across the Turkish-Iranian border for decades. Daniel had learned of the method from an asset in Ankara, who specialized in customs evasion. The method exploited a peculiarity in Iranian export inspections. Household appliances shipped in bulk for commercial purposes received less scrutiny than passenger vehicles or cargo containers. Inspectors checked serial numbers, manifests, and exterior condition, but rarely dismantled the units unless there was specific intelligence suggesting contraband. A washing machine was large enough to conceal a human body if the internal components were removed and the cavity was modified. It was heavy enough that its weight would not seem abnormal even with a person inside. It was common enough that a truck carrying 12 units would not attract attention. The challenge was engineering. A standard top-loading washing machine had an internal drum that occupied most of the interior space. Removing the drum created a cavity, but the cavity was filled with motors, pumps, hoses, and electrical components. All of this had to be stripped out while maintaining the machine's external appearance. The exterior panels had to appear factory-sealed. The weight distribution had to seem normal. The venting had to allow minimal airflow to prevent suffocation without being obvious to inspectors. Daniel spent 8 days in a warehouse outside Ankara designing the modification with a team of engineers who believed they were building smuggling compartments for heroin. They constructed a prototype, tested it with a volunteer, and determined that an adult male of average build could survive inside for 12 hours if positioned correctly and medically sedated to reduce oxygen consumption and metabolic demand. The prototype was successful. 11 additional machines were purchased, and one was fully modified to operational specifications. The modified machine and 11 unmodified units were loaded onto a truck bearing commercial shipping manifests for a wholesale appliance distributor in Istanbul. The truck crossed into Iran on October 28th, 5 days ahead of schedule. It cleared customs without inspection. The machines were delivered to a warehouse Daniel had rented in the Shahriyar district on the outskirts of Tehran. The modified unit was then transported to the safe house in the Sadegeh district. The extraction apparatus was in place. Ahmadi's information gathering proceeded on schedule, but not without complications. His access to the Fordo facility had been temporarily suspended due to a security audit triggered by an unrelated incident. A junior technician had been caught selling centrifuge blueprints to a Pakistani intermediary. The entire facility was locked down for a week while counterintelligence teams conducted interviews and polygraph examinations. Ahmadi was cleared, but his movements were now being monitored more closely than before. He could no longer remove documents from the facility. Photographing materials was impossible due to enhanced electronic surveillance. He resorted to memorization, spending hours each night writing down technical specifications, personnel details, and operational procedures from memory. He used the encrypted phone to transmit this information to Shahar in compressed text files sent through a secure server in Germany. The files were fragmented and routed through multiple relays to prevent tracing. Shahar compiled the information and transmitted it to Tel Aviv via satellite uplink. The intelligence was immediately assessed as high value. Ahmadi's descriptions of the Fordo facility matched satellite imagery and confirmed suspicions about Iran's accelerated enrichment timeline. The information justified the operational risk. The extraction was confirmed for November 3rd. On October 30th, a new problem emerged. Ahmadi's gambling debt, the leverage point that had made him vulnerable to recruitment, was suddenly forgiven. A Revolutionary Guard captain named Reza Hosseini, one of the officers to whom Ahmadi owed money, visited Ahmadi's apartment and informed him the debt was cancelled. No explanation was provided. Hosseini simply said the matter was resolved and left. Ahmadi immediately suspected a trap. The timing was too convenient. He sent an encrypted message to Shahar reporting the development and asking if the operation should be aborted. Shahar consulted with Tel Aviv. The analysts were divided. One faction believed the debt forgiveness was unrelated, possibly a gesture intended to secure Ahmadi's loyalty and keep him productive within the nuclear program. Another faction believed it was a counterintelligence operation. Ahmadi had been identified as a potential defector. The debt forgiveness was a test, and surveillance teams were watching to see if he would attempt to flee. A third analysis suggested the debt forgiveness was genuine, but the timing coincidental, possibly related to an internal power struggle within the Revolutionary Guard that had nothing to do with Ahmadi's recruitment. Katz, the deputy director in Tel Aviv, made the final call. The operation would proceed. The logic was brutal but sound. If Ahmadi had been compromised, aborting the extraction would confirm his guilt and result in his arrest. Proceeding with the extraction gave him a chance at survival and provided Israel with the intelligence he had already gathered. The risk was acceptable. Shahar informed Ahmadi. The extraction was still scheduled for November 3rd at 10:47 p.m. The days preceding the extraction were marked by escalating tension. On November 1st, a sweep by Ministry of Intelligence agents resulted in the arrest of 4 individuals in Tehran, suspected of espionage on behalf of Western powers. The arrests were publicized on state television, complete with confessions and dramatic footage of documents being seized. Shahar watched the broadcast in her hotel room and noted that none of the arrested individuals matched the profile of anyone involved in Ahmadi's network. The arrests were likely unrelated, but they demonstrated the heightened state of alert within Iranian security services. On November 2nd, Daniel reported a more direct problem. The truck driver he had recruited, the former taxi operator with debts to the local crime syndicate, had been hospitalized after a bar fight. The driver was alive but incapacitated, his jaw broken and his ribs fractured. He would not be able to drive the truck across the border. Daniel had 36 hours to find a replacement. He contacted a secondary asset, a truck driver who had previously smuggled electronics and cigarettes across the Turkish border. This driver was more expensive, demanding $15,000 in advance, but he was available and experienced. Daniel paid him in cash and provided explicit instructions. The driver would pick up a load of washing machines from a warehouse in Shahryar, drive them to the Turkish border via the Tabriz route, and cross at the Bazargan checkpoint. The driver asked no questions. He had made this run 100 times. The cargo was irrelevant. The money was good. He agreed. On the morning of November 3rd, Shahar met Ahmadi for the final time before the extraction. The meeting occurred in a public restroom at the Azadi Tower, a tourist site with enough foot traffic to obscure their presence. Shahar handed Ahmadi a vial containing the sedative and a printed sheet of instructions. The sedative was a compound designed to lower heart rate, reduce metabolic demand, and induce a state of semi-consciousness that would make the 11-hour confinement inside the washing machine survivable. The dosage was precise. Too little, and Ahmadi would remain fully conscious, experiencing panic and claustrophobia that could cause him to thrash and damage the machine's exterior, alerting inspectors. Too much, and his respiratory system could shut down, killing him before the truck reached the border. Ahmadi was instructed to take the sedative at 10:30 p.m., exactly 17 minutes before the extraction. Shahar also provided him with a cyanide capsule, a fail-safe in case of capture. She did not sugarcoat its purpose. If he was caught, interrogation would be brutal and prolonged. The capsule offered an alternative. Ahmadi took both items without comment. His hands were steady. He had made his decision weeks ago. There was no turning back now. At 8:15 p.m. on November 3rd, Daniel arrived at the safe house in the Sadagia district with the modified washing machine loaded on a dolly. The machine weighed 93 kilograms, an increase of 12 kilograms over the standard model due to reinforced paneling and the addition of concealed air vents. The safe house was a 2-story building with a basement accessible through a narrow staircase. Daniel and a local asset, a Syrian immigrant who had been paid $500 and told he was assisting in an appliance delivery, maneuvered the machine down the stairs and into the basement. The Syrian was then dismissed. He left without asking questions. Once alone, Daniel and Shahar began the final preparations. They removed the front access panel, revealing the cavity where Ahmadi would be concealed. They tested the air vents, confirming that airflow was sufficient but not obvious from external inspection. They placed a medical alert device inside the cavity, a small sensor that would monitor Ahmadi's heart rate and transmit the data to a receiver Daniel would carry. If Ahmadi's heart rate dropped below 40 beats per minute, indicating critical distress, the receiver would vibrate. There would be nothing they could do at that point. But at least they would know. They reassembled the panel, leaving it loosely attached for quick removal when Ahmadi arrived. Ahmadi arrived at the safe house at 10:22 p.m., 8 minutes ahead of schedule. He had walked from his apartment, a distance of 2 kilometers, and had taken a circuitous route to avoid surveillance. He was carrying nothing. No identification, no documents, no personal effects. Everything that could link him to his former life had been left behind. Shahar met him at the door and led him to the basement. She asked if he had taken the sedative. He nodded. She checked his pupils with a penlight. The sedative was beginning to take effect. His movements were slower, his speech slightly slurred. She explained the procedure one final time. He would enter the cavity feet first, curling into a fetal position. The panel would be reattached and sealed from the outside. The machine would be loaded onto the truck with the 11 other units. The truck would depart at 11:30 p.m. and drive through the night, reaching the Tabriz checkpoint by dawn. The crossing into Turkey would occur by midday. Once across the border, the truck would drive to a warehouse in Ankara, where Mossad operatives would be waiting. The entire journey would take between 11 and 14 hours. Ahmadi listened without interrupting. When she finished, he asked a single question. What happened if the truck was stopped and the machines were inspected? Shahar did not lie. If the machine was opened before the Turkish border, he would be discovered. The cyanide capsule was in his pocket. He touched his pocket, confirming its presence. Then he nodded and said he was ready. The process of sealing Ahmadi inside the machine took 4 minutes. He removed his shoes and jacket, items that would add unnecessary bulk, and climbed into the cavity. Shahar and Daniel guided his positioning, adjusting his arms and legs to fit within the confined space. His knees pressed against his chest, his head tucked down, his arms wrapped around his shins. The position was agonizing, even under sedation, but it was the only configuration that allowed the panel to close, flush with the machine's exterior. Once he was in place, Daniel reattached the panel using an electric screwdriver, working quickly to minimize the time Ahmadi spent in the enclosed space before transport. The panel locked into place with a series of metallic clicks. Ahmadi was now invisible, sealed inside a compartment that appeared to external inspection as nothing more than a factory-standard washing machine. Shahar tapped twice on the exterior panel, a signal that the sealing was complete. There was no response from inside. The sedative had fully taken hold. Ahmadi was unconscious, or nearly so. The medical alert device showed his heart rate at 58 beats per minute, elevated but stable. They loaded the machine onto the dolly and wheeled it up the stairs to the ground floor, then out the rear exit to the alley, where the truck was waiting. The truck was a Mercedes-Benz Atego 1218, a medium-duty commercial vehicle commonly used for regional freight transport. Its cargo bed contained 11 washing machines arranged in 2 rows, each machine wrapped in protective plastic and secured with cargo straps. The modified machine was loaded into position as the 12th unit, placed in the center of the second row where it would be least accessible for inspection. Daniel and the driver, a stocky Azeri man in his 50s who introduced himself only as Hassan, secured the machine with additional straps and covered the entire load with a tarpaulin. The manifest identified the cargo as household appliances bound for a distributor in Istanbul, routed through the Bazargan border crossing. The paperwork was flawless, generated using authentic Turkish customs forms and stamped with forged but visually identical seals. Hassan reviewed the manifest, asked Daniel if there was anything unusual about the cargo, and Daniel lied and said no. Hassan shrugged and climbed into the cab. He did not care. The money was good and the route was familiar. The truck departed the alley at 11:34 p.m., 4 minutes behind schedule but within acceptable margins. Shahar and Daniel watched it disappear into Tehran's nighttime traffic. The next phase was out of their hands. The route from Tehran to the Turkish border covered approximately 850 kilometers, a drive of roughly 12 hours under normal conditions. The route followed Highway 2 northwest through Kazvin and Zanjan before reaching Tabriz, the largest city in northwestern Iran and the final major checkpoint before the border. From Tabriz, the highway continued west to the Bazargan crossing, a high-traffic border post that processed commercial freight 24 hours a day. The Bazargan crossing was selected for the extraction because of its volume. Over 500 trucks passed through daily, making individual inspections logistically impractical. Most vehicles received only cursory checks, with inspectors reviewing manifests and verifying serial numbers on high-value goods. Washing machines, classified as low-priority consumer goods, typically received minimal scrutiny. The plan depended on this statistical probability. If the truck was flagged for detailed inspection, the operation would fail. Hassan drove at a steady 90 kilometers per hour, fast enough to stay on schedule but not fast enough to attract attention from traffic police. The highway was patrolled by both regular police and Revolutionary Guard units, with random checkpoints established at unpredictable intervals. Hassan had made this drive over 100 times. He knew where the checkpoints were most likely to appear. He also knew that the best defense against inspection was to appear unremarkable. A tired driver hauling a mundane load, eager to reach the border and collect his fee. At 1:47 a.m., the truck passed through Kazvin without incident. At 3:22 a.m., it was stopped at a random checkpoint outside Zanjan. 2 traffic police officers approached the cab, flashlights in hand. Hassan rolled down his window and handed over his documents: driver's license, vehicle registration, and cargo manifest. One officer reviewed the paperwork while the second walked around the truck, shining his flashlight over the tarpaulin-covered load. The officer asked Hassan what he was carrying. Hassan replied, "Washing machines, bound for Istanbul." The officer asked if he could see the cargo. Hassan hesitated, then climbed out of the cab and walked to the rear of the truck. He loosened the tarpaulin and pulled it back, revealing the top row of machines. The officer inspected the serial numbers on 2 of the units, comparing them to the manifest. The numbers matched. The officer asked why Hassan was driving at night. Hassan explained that his schedule required him to reach the border by noon to meet a customs broker on the Turkish side. The explanation was mundane and plausible. The officer nodded and waved him through. The entire interaction lasted 7 minutes. Hassan resecured the tarpaulin and returned to the cab. He did not know that one of the washing machines in his cargo contained a human being whose heart rate had spiked to 91 beats per minute during the inspection. A spike detected by the medical alert device and transmitted to Daniel's receiver 300 kilometers away in Tehran. Daniel checked the device, noted the spike, and then watched as the heart rate gradually decreased back to 62 beats per minute. Ahmadi was alive. The truck continued west. Back in Tehran, Shahar and Daniel executed the next phase of their exfiltration. They could not leave Iran together. Traveling as a pair increased the risk of detection. Shahar departed first at 4 a.m. on November 4th, using her Swedish passport to board a Turkish Airlines flight from Imam Khomeini International Airport to Istanbul. Her cover story remained consistent: a textile buyer concluding a business trip. She carried fabric samples in her luggage and receipts from Tehran carpet vendors. She passed through passport control without issue and boarded the flight. The plane departed at 6:15 a.m. Shahar would be in Istanbul by 8:30 a.m. local time, 4 hours ahead of the truck's expected arrival at the border. Daniel's departure was more complex. He could not use the Turkish passport that had brought him into Iran. Exit records were cross-checked against entry records, and discrepancies triggered investigations. Instead, he used a secondary identity: an Iraqi passport in the name of a telecommunications contractor. This identity had been established specifically for the Tehran operation, and had no entry record in Iran because it had supposedly entered through the porous border with Iraq, a crossing where record-keeping was inconsistent. Daniel traveled by bus from Tehran to Tabriz, a journey that would take 12 hours and place him in Tabriz by early afternoon on November 4th. From Tabriz, he would cross the border on foot through a Kurdish smuggling route, a dangerous but well-established path that bypassed official checkpoints. This route required a payment of $3,000 to a Kurdish facilitator and carried the risk of encountering Iranian border guards, Turkish military patrols, or opportunistic bandits. Daniel had used the route twice before. He knew the risks. He also knew that remaining in Tehran after the operation was more dangerous than crossing the mountains on foot. The truck reached Tabriz at 7:53 a.m. on November 4th. Hassan stopped at a roadside cafe for breakfast, a 40-minute pause that was within the operational timeline but added strain to the mission clock. Ahmadi had now been sealed inside the washing machine for over 9 hours. His sedative was metabolizing, and the medical alert device showed his heart rate increasing, now at 74 beats per minute. The increase suggested he was regaining consciousness. This was a problem. If Ahmadi woke fully before the border crossing, the pain and claustrophobia of his confinement could trigger panic, screaming, or attempts to break free, any of which would expose the operation. The sedative had been calculated to last 12 hours, providing a margin of safety, but individual metabolic rates varied. Ahmadi was apparently metabolizing the drug faster than anticipated. There was nothing Hassan could do. He did not know there was a person in his cargo. He finished his breakfast, paid his bill, and returned to the truck. The final leg of the journey, from Tabriz to the Bazargan crossing, covered 140 kilometers and would take approximately 2 hours. The truck departed the cafe at 8:47 a.m. The Bazargan border crossing was a sprawling complex of inspection lanes, customs offices, and parking areas stretching for over a kilometer. On the Iranian side, trucks queued in designated lanes according to cargo type. Commercial vehicles carrying consumer goods used lanes 7 through 12. Hassan joined the queue in lane 9 at 10:52 a.m. There were 18 trucks ahead of him. The line moved slowly. Each truck was stopped at a primary inspection point where an officer reviewed documents. Trucks flagged for additional inspection were diverted to secondary bays where cargo was unloaded and examined. Trucks that passed the primary inspection proceeded directly to the customs office for final clearance, and then to the physical border gate. The average wait time was 90 minutes. Hassan had crossed this border 100 times. He knew the process. He also knew that the inspection criteria were inconsistent, influenced by factors ranging from the inspector's mood to recent intelligence alerts to random selection quotas. There was no way to predict which trucks would be flagged. The only strategy was to appear unremarkable and hope for statistical luck. At 11:37 a.m., the truck ahead of Hassan in the queue was diverted to a secondary inspection bay. The truck was carrying electronics, a higher risk category than household appliances. The diversion was not unusual. Hassan's truck moved forward. At 12:14 p.m., Hassan reached the primary inspection point. An officer approached the cab, reviewed his documents, and asked the standard questions. "What is your cargo? Where is it going? Do you have anything to declare?" Hassan answered each question calmly and accurately. The officer walked to the rear of the truck and inspected the tarpaulin. He asked Hassan to pull it back. Hassan complied, revealing the top row of washing machines. The officer checked the serial numbers on 3 units, comparing them to the manifest. He then asked Hassan to remove one of the machines from the truck for a detailed inspection. This request was unusual, but not unprecedented. Hassan hesitated. The officer repeated the request. Hassan nodded and began loosening the cargo straps. He selected a machine from the top row, one of the unmodified units, and used a hand dolly to lower it to the ground. The officer instructed Hassan to remove the back panel. Hassan complied, using a screwdriver from the truck's toolbox. The panel came off, revealing the standard internal components: drum, motor, pump, hoses. The officer inspected the interior, found nothing unusual. and instructed Hassan to reassemble the panel and reload the machine. The entire process took 14 minutes. At 12:28 p.m., Hassan was cleared for final customs processing. The truck proceeded to the customs office, where Hassan paid the required fees and received the exit stamp. At 12:51 p.m., the truck crossed the physical border gate into Turkey. The operation's most dangerous phase was complete. Ahmadi, still sealed inside the washing machine, had been inside the cavity for 14 hours and 4 minutes. His heart rate, according to the medical alert device, was 87 beats per minute and climbing. On the Turkish side of the border, the truck was met by a Mossad reception team operating undercover as employees of a Turkish logistics company. The team consisted of 3 operatives: a case officer named Uri, who had flown in from Tel Aviv 2 days earlier, a medical doctor named Livnat, who specialized in extraction trauma, and a driver with a van equipped with medical supplies. Uri had been monitoring the truck's progress through updates from Daniel and had positioned his team at a warehouse in the town of Doğubayazıt, 20 kilometers from the border. Hassan drove the truck to the warehouse, arriving at 1:37 p.m. He was instructed to park inside and wait. Hassan complied, though his expression showed confusion. He had expected to unload the washing machines and depart. Instead, Uri handed him an envelope containing an additional $10,000 and told him the delivery had been completed successfully. Hassan took the money and left without asking questions. Uri, Livnat, and the driver immediately moved to the truck and located the modified washing machine. They removed it from the cargo bed and placed it on the warehouse floor. Livnat used a medical stethoscope to listen through the exterior panel. She heard a faint, irregular heartbeat. Ahmadi was alive, but in distress. Uri and the driver used power tools to remove the panel as quickly as possible. The panel came free at 1:44 p.m. Ahmadi was curled inside the cavity, his body rigid and unresponsive. Livnat checked his vitals. His heart rate was 103 beats per minute. His body temperature was 35.2 degrees Celsius, below normal. His breathing was shallow. He was severely dehydrated and showing early signs of hypothermia and shock. Livnat immediately administered intravenous fluids and a mild stimulant to stabilize his cardiovascular system. Ahmadi's eyes opened. He was conscious but disoriented. Livnat asked him his name. He did not respond immediately. She repeated the question. He whispered, "Reza." She told him he was safe. He was in Turkey. The extraction was successful. Ahmadi began to cry. The immediate priority was moving Ahmadi out of Turkey and into a secure location where he could be debriefed. The plan called for transport to Ankara, then a flight to Tel Aviv via a circuitous route through Athens to avoid direct connections that might flag intelligence monitoring systems. Livnat determined that Ahmadi was not stable enough for immediate air travel. His dehydration and hypothermia required at least 12 hours of recovery under medical supervision. The team moved him to a safe house in Doğubayazıt, a small apartment rented under a cover identity. Livnat continued administering fluids and monitored his condition. By 8 p.m. on November 4th, Ahmadi's vitals had stabilized. His heart rate was 72 beats per minute. His body temperature had risen to 36.4 degrees Celsius. He was able to sit up and drink water. He asked where Shahar was. Uri explained that she had already exited Iran and was en route to Tel Aviv. Ahmadi asked what would happen to him next. Uri explained the process: medical recovery, debriefing in Tel Aviv, relocation to a secure third country with a new identity. Ahmadi asked if he would ever see his family again. Uri did not lie. Contact with family members would be impossible for at least 5 years. possibly longer depending on the geopolitical situation and the risk of Iranian retaliation. Ahmadi nodded. He had known this would be the cost. He had made his choice. On November 5th, Ahmadi was transported to Ankara in the back of the van. A 6-hour drive through mountainous terrain. The journey was uneventful. In Ankara, he was taken to a Mossad safe house located in the Chankaya district, a residential area with low foot traffic and minimal surveillance risk. The safe house was a 3-bedroom apartment maintained under the cover of a technology consulting firm. Ahmadi was given a bedroom, a shower, and clean clothes. Livnat continued to monitor his health. By the evening of November 5th, he was medically cleared for travel. On November 6th at 6:45 a.m., Ahmadi boarded a Turkish Airlines flight to Athens using a Canadian passport in the name of Michael Rezaei, an identity created by Mossad's documentation division. The passport was genuine, issued through a complex process involving a real Canadian citizen of Iranian descent who had agreed to cooperate with Israeli intelligence in exchange for financial compensation. Ahmadi's photograph had been inserted into the passport system using access Mossad maintained through a compromised official in the Canadian Passport Office. The identity would hold under scrutiny, but only for a limited time. Ahmadi would use it only for this one journey. In Athens, Ahmadi was met by another Mossad team and transferred to a private jet chartered by a front company. The jet departed Athens at 3:15 p.m. and landed at Ben Gurion Airport in Tel Aviv at 5:47 p.m. on November 6th. Ahmadi stepped off the plane onto Israeli soil 79 hours after being sealed inside the washing machine in Tehran. The debriefing of Dr. Reza Ahmadi began on November 7th and continued for 6 weeks. The sessions were conducted at a secure facility outside Tel Aviv, a nondescript building that appeared externally as a research institute. Ahmadi was interviewed by a rotating team of specialists, nuclear physicists, intelligence analysts, military strategists, and Middle East experts. The interviews were recorded, transcribed, and analyzed in real time. Ahmadi provided detailed descriptions of the Fordo facility, including the number and type of centrifuges, the layout of the underground complex, the security protocols governing access, and the identities of key personnel. He described procurement networks used to acquire specialized components from China and North Korea, detailing the intermediaries, payment methods, and shipping routes. He provided technical specifications for Iran's P2 centrifuge design, information that allowed Israeli and Western scientists to assess the efficiency and capacity of Iran's enrichment program. He also revealed the existence of a previously unknown research site near Parchin, where experiments on neutron initiators were being conducted, a clear indicator of weaponization research. The intelligence Ahmadi provided was comprehensive and actionable. It confirmed Western suspicions about the scope of Iran's nuclear ambitions and provided specific targets for potential sabotage or military action. The value of the intelligence justified the operational risk of the extraction. More importantly, it validated the entire methodology, recruiting insiders, exploiting personal vulnerabilities, and using unconventional extraction methods to remove high-value assets from hostile territories. The Iranian response to Ahmadi's disappearance was swift, but initially misdirected. On November 4th, when Ahmadi failed to report for work at the Fordo facility, his absence was noted, but not immediately flagged as suspicious. Security personnel assumed he was ill or dealing with a family emergency. On November 5th, when Ahmadi still had not made contact, security officers visited his apartment. They found it empty, but not ransacked. His identification documents were missing, but his clothing and personal effects remained. This suggested a planned departure rather than an abduction. On November 6th, the Ministry of Intelligence opened a formal investigation. Ahmadi's communications were examined. His encrypted phone was never recovered. He had destroyed it before entering the safe house on November 3rd. However, investigators were able to trace some of his internet activity through server logs maintained by Iran's telecommunications infrastructure. The logs showed that Ahmadi had accessed proxy servers and encrypted messaging platforms, behavior consistent with espionage. On November 8th, Iranian state television broadcast a news report claiming that Dr. Reza Ahmadi, a scientist working in the civilian energy sector, had been kidnapped by Israeli intelligence agents. The report included a photograph of Ahmadi and a statement from his wife, who claimed he had been taken against his will. The broadcast was intended to shape the narrative and deflect attention from the possibility that Ahmadi had defected voluntarily. Internally, however, Iranian intelligence knew the truth. Ahmadi had been recruited, and he had provided information to a foreign power. The investigation focused on identifying his contacts and determining how much information he had compromised. The fallout from Ahmadi's defection extended beyond the immediate intelligence loss. In the weeks following his departure, Iranian security services conducted a comprehensive audit of personnel working in sensitive programs. Over 40 individuals were subjected to polygraph examinations, interrogations, and surveillance. 3 were arrested on suspicion of espionage, though none were directly connected to Ahmadi. The arrests were intended to demonstrate vigilance and deter future defections. Security protocols at the Fordo facility were overhauled. Access was restricted further, and new counterintelligence measures were implemented, including random phone inspections and restrictions on international travel for all personnel. The changes made it significantly more difficult for Mossad to recruit additional assets within Iran's nuclear program. The operational environment had become more hostile, and the window of opportunity that had allowed Ahmadi's recruitment and extraction had closed. This was an expected consequence. Every successful operation increased the difficulty of future operations. Intelligence work was a constant cycle of adaptation and counter-adaptation. For Ahmadi, the aftermath of the extraction was a mixture of relief and dislocation. After the initial debriefing in Tel Aviv, he was relocated to a third country, a Western nation with a large expatriate community, where he could blend in without attracting attention. His new identity was thoroughly constructed. A complete background, financial history, employment records, and even a fabricated social media presence dating back several years. He was provided with a modest stipend, enough to live comfortably but not ostentatiously. He was forbidden from contacting anyone from his previous life, including his sister in Montreal and his daughter in Germany. Mossad monitored his communications and movements to ensure he did not compromise operational security. Ahmadi struggled with the isolation. He had escaped Iran, but he had also lost his family, his identity, and any semblance of a normal life. He attended therapy sessions provided by Mossad's support services, sessions designed to help defectors cope with the psychological trauma of extraction and relocation. The therapist, a psychologist who specialized in working with intelligence assets, explained that what Ahmadi was experiencing was a form of profound grief. He was mourning the life he had left behind. The grief was normal. It would take time to process. Ahmadi asked how much time. The therapist could not answer. Some defectors adjusted within a year. Others never fully adjusted. Ahmadi would have to find his own path. In the years following the operation, the intelligence Ahmadi provided played a significant role in shaping Western policy toward Iran. The detailed descriptions of the Fordo facility were used to refine satellite surveillance and develop contingency plans for potential military strikes. The information about procurement networks led to sanctions targeting specific intermediaries and companies, disrupting Iran's ability to acquire specialized components. The revelations about the Parchin research site prompted inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency, though Iranian authorities denied access, and the inspections yielded limited results. The intelligence also informed the negotiation strategy used during the talks that eventually led to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in 2015. The agreement that temporarily limited Iran's nuclear program in exchange for sanctions relief. Ahmadi's information provided negotiators with leverage and clarity about Iran's capabilities and intentions. The value of a single defector, extracted under extraordinary circumstances, had cascading effects that shaped geopolitics for years. The washing machine used in Ahmadi's extraction was destroyed after the operation. The modified unit was dismantled in the Ankara warehouse, its components separated and disposed of through multiple channels to prevent reconstruction or analysis. The remaining 11 unmodified machines were sold to a legitimate appliance distributor in Istanbul, their connection to the operation severed. The truck driver, Hassan, was paid an additional $50,000 6 months after the operation and instructed never to speak of the delivery. He complied. He had no interest in drawing attention from intelligence services. The safe houses in Tehran were abandoned. Daniel and Shahar returned to Israel and were reassigned to other operations. Daniel continued working in covert logistics, running supply chains for Mossad operations across the Middle East. Shahar transitioned to a training role, teaching new operatives the skills required for deep cover infiltration in hostile territories. Both received commendations for their work on the Tehran extraction, commendations that were classified and would never appear in any public record. In the world of intelligence, success was often invisible. The methodology used to extract Ahmadi, specifically the use of a modified washing machine as a concealment device, was never used again. The technique had succeeded once, but its security had been compromised the moment Ahmadi crossed into Turkey. Iranian intelligence would now be aware that such methods were possible, and countermeasures would be developed. Customs inspectors at Iranian border crossings began conducting more thorough examinations of household appliances, a direct consequence of the operation. Future extractions would require new methods, new technologies, and new vulnerabilities to exploit. This was the nature of intelligence work. Every success was temporary, every advantage fleeting. The only constant was the necessity of adaptation. Ahmadi's story, like most intelligence operations, remained classified for years. The details of his extraction were known only to a small circle of operatives, analysts, and policymakers. Publicly, Ahmadi simply vanished. Iranian state media claimed he had been kidnapped. Western intelligence agencies neither confirmed nor denied the reports. The ambiguity served both sides. Iran could claim that its scientists were being targeted by foreign adversaries, reinforcing internal narratives about external threats. Israel could maintain operational security and protect its methods. The truth, as always, existed in the shadows between public statements and classified files. Decades after the operation, when documents began to be declassified and participants began to speak more openly, the extraction of Dr. Reza Ahmadi was recognized as one of the most technically complex and operationally daring missions in Mossad's history. The combination of human intelligence, technical ingenuity, and flawless execution under extreme pressure represented the pinnacle of covert operations. The washing machine, an object so mundane and unremarkable that it could pass through one of the world's most secure borders without raising suspicion, had become the vessel for one man's escape from a totalitarian regime, and the means by which a treasure trove of intelligence was delivered into the hands of those who sought to counter a nuclear threat. The operation was a reminder that in the world of espionage, the most effective weapons are often the most unexpected, and the most significant victories are often the ones that remain hidden from history.